This right here is my Cotyledon Pendens, and it's not the first time I've owned one of these plants. In fact, the first time I owned one of these plants, I absolutely killed it. However, fast forward a couple years and a couple plant purchases, and this time I actually have this guy flowering. So today I wanted to tell you just all the things that I've learned over the years about taking care of these plants, what they like, what they don't like, and if you have one of them, how you can keep them happy and healthy. So if you want to learn more, then keep on watching and we'll get into it right now. Now, the Cotyledon are native to the cliffs of South Africa, and this is the first thing that you're going to want to keep in mind when you're buying one of these plants and if you go to repot it. So personally, what I've found in having these plants is that they have a pretty shallow root system. So I would say if you can find a pot that's wide and not super deep, that's really going to be something helpful in taking care of this plant. And to go off of that, the soil that you want to put it in, make sure that it's very well draining. It's just going to mimic its natural habitat. Again, it's naturally growing off the side of a cliff, so it's going to have very good drainage, and you're going to want to make sure that your soil does the same. That brings us into watering with these guys. Now, the thing that I love about these plants, and I think is actually really helpful if you're more of a beginner, is that once the plant starts to get thirsty, it's going to shrivel and wrinkle up, which will be your indicator to go in and give it a drink. The only time that won't be the case is if you notice that these are shriveled up and wrinkled, but the soil is very wet to the touch. That is going to be your sign that this plant probably unfortunately is root rot, and you're going to want to get the roots out of that soil as fast as you possibly can. And what you may even find in that scenario is that there's not any roots left, but that's totally okay. If that is the case for you, feel free to do a stem propagation on these. Just cut off the dead roots, cut off anything that looks like it's rotting or black or kind of just unhealthy, and you can usually save the rest of the plant from there. Now, we're kind of jumping all over the place, but I'm going to hop to propagation while we're on the topic. As I had mentioned, you can do a stem propagation. You can actually even just, if one of these little leaflets fall off, root the plant up right from there. But personally, what I find to be the easiest is, again, because I find that these roots are very, very shallow on this plant and they're not super intertwined. A lot of these stems all have their very own root systems. So if your friend has one of these plants, or if you're looking to sell off a piece of your plant, honestly, I would recommend just doing a division on this plant. I'm not going to do it right now because I don't want to have to repot it, but you can very easily pull these stems right out of the soil, and as long as you're gentle, the roots will come right with it. So instead of having to do a full propagation where you're growing the roots, you'll just already have them on there, which makes things a lot faster and easier. And I just mentioned that if one of the leaves fall off, you can use that propagation method. You may have been eyeing up on this side of the screen my alien-like burrow's tail, and as you can see, it's a little straggly. It definitely does not get enough sunlight, but the thing I wanted to contrast is that these plants do look very, very similar. However, I find that this one, the burrow's tail, is way more delicate. If I just like breathe on this plant the wrong way, the little leaflets fall off, and I think that this guy's a lot more hardy, at least from my experience, which I really like about these, just from a standpoint of repotting or anything that you have to do to move the plant, things like that. It's not going to be dropping the leaves as crazy as this guy does. I have them literally all over my little table right here. So, fun fact, if you're between the two of these, honestly, I would recommend the Cotyledon. Oh God. Falling everywhere. Let's gingerly put this guy down. But coming back to the Cotyledon, I had kind of skimmed over how often to water this plant, and like everything, it's really going to have a lot of variation depending on the environment that you've had them in. I'd mentioned at the start of the video that I had killed one of these in the past, and what I had found I was really struggling with was keeping this plant inside. When I had it inside, I found that this guy needed very, very infrequent waterings. Maybe every 2 weeks to every month is how often I was watering him. However, nowadays I have this guy sitting outside, and particularly with it being just about summertime here in Arizona, I have to water this guy quite a bit more often. Nowadays I find just about every week, if not sometimes sooner. I can see just looking at him right now, he's pretty wrinkly, so it's definitely time for a drink. But again, really look at those leaves for the sign of when to go in with water, or of course, you can always do the standard finger test. Get your finger as deep down into that soil as you can, or get one of the little soil meters. Those are great too. Real quickly before we move on to lighting, I'll mention humidity. This is a very succulent style plant, so you do not have to worry about humidity, which again, if you're someone living here in the desert like myself, is fantastic because I'm not trying to run out and buy 10,000 humidifiers. Now this brings us into the place that I think I struggled the most with in the past in this plant. Again, as I had mentioned, in the past, I've tried growing this plant inside, and I had a lot of really great natural light coming in. So it's not like I was growing this plant in a dark corner of my house, but even still, I just felt like it wasn't quite enough light. Nowadays, I have it outside sitting on my covered patio. It gets a couple hours of direct morning sun, and then once that sun shifts higher into the sky, it comes into more of a dappled light, which I think that this plant really likes. Honestly, I think it could even get a little more sunlight looking at the leaf tips. I'll put a close-up up here, and what you'll see is that some of these leaves have a little red rim on the end of them. And that's going to be a really good indicator if your plant is or isn't getting enough light. As I mentioned, looking at these newer leaves coming in, they're completely green, so that's kind of the indicator to me that I think I could give it even a little more light, but personally, I am terrible at remembering to put my plant outside and then bring it in before it gets too crazy hot. So I'm not gonna press my luck. I'm just gonna leave it where it is. But definitely if you live somewhere where the sun isn't so intense, I think you could push it out a little more. Although overall, these guys aren't gonna wanna sit in direct sunlight all day long. However, to go off of a feature that might protect this guy from more of that sun is you'll notice that it kind of has that similar white coating to it that the burrow's tail does. I know it has an official name and I can never for the life of me remember it, so please, if you know what it's called, drop it in the comments down below. But that kind of chalky powder on there is going to, in a way, act as a little bit of a sunblock, so that is going to help the plant. Although if you're handling the plant a lot, or if you're kind of watering directly onto the leaves, you may start to notice that that powder will kind of rub off of the plants, and once it's gone, it's just gone forever. It's not going to come back. So again, it is just going to be a plant that you're going to want to be a little more careful around. And while we're on the topic of being careful, this plant is absolutely toxic to pets like cats and dogs. I couldn't find solid information if it was toxic to humans or not, but honestly, probably better safe than sorry. And if you do have animals or small children, you're probably gonna wanna put this plant on a higher up place where they can't get to it. Now in its mature form, these plants can get up to about 2 feet long. And when they get big and super bushy, they are so beautiful. Again, they'll start to put out these little flowers that mine has on here right now. It's this beautiful pinkish peach color. And the more light that it gets, the more intense that those flowers will be. I only have this one open right now, but you may be able to see that I have a series of these little flowers hanging off, just waiting to be open. So when these are in full bloom, it is really quite the sight. Getting into a little bit of troubleshooting about these guys. First off, they're not gonna be cold hardy. So if you are choosing to grow these outside and you live somewhere where it does have hard frost in the wintertime, you're going to want to make sure that it's in a pot that is light enough where you can carry it inside. Additionally, while this is pretty counterintuitive to what we think about for most plants, but if you do live somewhere where the humidity is pretty high, you're going to want to keep an eye on this plant. It can kind of develop little pockets and molds between the leaflets and the stems just because it is kind of congested in here. So just be careful that you're not kind of having water sitting on these leaves and getting too mildewy in there, because it will start to cause problems. If you do notice it on some of the areas of the plant, try and just clip them back so that it's not spreading to the other areas. But again, obviously, you know, it's a little bit of an outlier where it's not going to like that humidity. A final thing that I'll note about these guys is that I really don't think that they ship that well. I used to stock a very similar variety of cotyledons in my shop, and I was just finding that every time I was shipping them, no matter what the temperature was, I tried a bunch of different shipping methods and they never seem to ship very well. And I'm not saying you absolutely can't get them online, but if you are looking to order online, I would really look for a seller who is experienced with shipping these, because just me personally, I know that they are pretty difficult to ship. Finally, I kind of touched on it earlier, but the roots on these guys are pretty fragile, so if you're going to repot it right from the store, I do typically find that they like really overcrowd them into the pot. Just be sure not to like go crazy and rip all the roots off, because if you're just going to shake off the dirt, you might not realize that you're actually like shaking the roots off. So yeah, overall, I would recommend this plant for somebody who has really bright light, maybe struggles with humidity in their house. And for skill level, I would say that they can definitely be super easy to take care of once you get a hang of them, but they are a little tricky at first, so I maybe wouldn't recommend them for a first-time plant person until they get a few other plants under their belt. I hope I was able to answer all your questions about the cotyledon, but if I didn't, of course, drop me a comment down below and I will try to answer it as soon as I can. If you like this video, don't forget to hit that like button and hit that subscribe button for more plant care videos in the future. And if you're interested in seeing the video where I had to fight people off when I got this plant for the first time, then click on this one right here. Until the end, and I hope to see you in the next one.